The throne room of Ithara Prime was silent. It was always silent when King Voreth Maltherin sat alone in the dark. The crystal walls, which normally glowed with the pale blue light of the planet's core, had been dimmed at his command. He did not want light. He did not want company. He wanted to think. 300 years he had ruled the Thalvori Empire. 12 star systems bent to his will. His 4 arms had crushed rebellions, signed treaties, and built monuments that would outlast the stars themselves. His bioluminescent skin, once bright with the fire of youth, now pulsed with a slower, deeper glow, the glow of something ancient and tired. But the empire was dying. They called it the Blight Tide. It had started in the outer systems, a slow, creeping wave of nothing. Stars dimmed, planets grew cold, energy fields collapsed. It was not an invasion. There were no enemies to fight, no armies to crush. It was simply decay, as if the universe itself had decided that the outer edges of Thalvori space were no longer worth existing. Voreth had sent scientists, he had sent fleets, he had sent priests. None returned with answers. The Blight Tide moved slowly, but it never stopped. In 50 years, perhaps less, it would reach Ithara Prime itself, and then there would be nothing left of his empire but dust and silence. He had 7 children. 6 of them were useless. That was not entirely fair. His eldest son, Prince Draven, was clever, dangerously clever. He played politics the way a spider spins webs, quietly, patiently, and always for his own benefit. His other children were warriors, diplomats, scholars. Any one of them could manage a province or lead a fleet, but none of them could save an empire. None of them had the fire. Except Caliph. His youngest daughter was different from the others. She had been different since the day she was born. While her siblings fought for attention and favor, Caliph had simply walked into the royal library at the age of 6 and not come out for 3 days. When the guards finally found her, she was sitting on the floor surrounded by ancient texts, and she looked up at her father with those bright golden eyes and said, "Father, did you know that the 3rd expansion could have been 1/2 the time if General Malthus had simply gone around the nebula instead of through it?" She had been right. As she grew, Caliph studied everything: warfare, science, diplomacy, philosophy, engineering. She trained with the Royal Guard until she could hold her own against soldiers twice her size. She debated with the Council of Thorns until even the oldest members stopped treating her like a child. She was brilliant and fierce and curious about everything, and Voreth loved her more than he had ever loved anything in his long, long life. It was Caliph who came to him with the idea. She had been studying the Blight Tide for years, gathering data from every failed expedition, every lost probe, every dying system. And she had found a pattern. The decay was not random. It was not natural. It was spreading from a single point, somewhere beyond the void wall, the uncharted boundary where known space ended and the unknown began. "Let me go," she had said, standing before him in the war room with maps and data projections floating around her like a constellation. "Let me take a ship beyond the void wall. I can find the source. I can find an answer." The Council of Thorns had erupted. The void wall was not a border, it was a death sentence. No ship that had ever crossed it had returned. The gravitational forces alone were enough to tear a cruiser apart. Beyond it lay nothing: no stars, no systems, no life. Only the void. "You are asking to die," old General Kithra had growled, his scarred face twisted with disapproval. "I am asking to save us," Caliph had replied without looking at him. Her eyes were on her father, only on her father. Voreth had sat in silence for a long time. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her. She was tall for a Thalvori female, lean and strong, with the sharp features of her mother and the stubborn jaw that was entirely his own. Her skin glowed with a warm amber light, steady and unwavering. She was not afraid. She was never afraid. That was what terrified him. He gave her a single warship. The Pale Flame, a fast, well-armed vessel crewed by 40 of the most loyal soldiers in his fleet. It was not enough for a proper expedition. It was barely enough for a scouting mission. But it was all he could spare and all she had asked for. The day she left, Voreth stood on the observation platform of the royal palace and watched the pale flame rise through the atmosphere. The ship caught the light of Ithara's twin suns and burned like a silver needle against the sky. He watched until it was gone. He did not wave. He did not speak. Thalvori kings did not show weakness. But his hands trembled at his sides. Months passed. The pale flame sent regular reports as it approached the void wall. Kalith's voice was calm and confident in every transmission. She described strange energy readings, gravitational shifts, and sensor anomalies that matched her predictions. She was close. She was so close. Then the transmission stopped. One day of silence became two became a week became a month. Voreth sent long-range probes to the void wall's edge. They found nothing. He redirected military satellites. They found nothing. He ordered a second ship to follow her path. It turned back before reaching the void wall, its crew reporting that the gravitational distortions had grown too severe to navigate. On the 42nd day of silence, the pale flame's emergency beacon fired once. A single, short burst of energy from somewhere beyond the void wall. Then it went dead. The Council of Thorns met the following morning. General Kithra presented the data in a flat, emotionless voice. The beacon's signal was consistent with catastrophic hull failure. No life signs had been detected. No further transmissions had been received. The mathematical probability of survival was less than 0.1%. Voreth listened to every word. He sat on his throne with his back straight and his 4 arms resting on the crystal armrests. His face showed nothing. His skin's glow did not flicker. The Princess Kalith Maltherin is declared lost beyond the void wall, General Kithra said. May her light join the stars. The council repeated the words. It was tradition. It was ritual. It meant nothing and everything at the same time. Voreth dismissed them. He dismissed his guards. He dismissed his servants. He sat alone in the throne room as the crystal walls dimmed and the shadows grew long and deep. Prince Draven came to him that evening with carefully practiced grief on his face and a proposal for succession in his hand. Voreth looked at the document, then looked at his son and said nothing. Draven left. He was clever enough to know when to retreat. Alone again, Voreth did something he had not done in 300 years. He lowered his head. His shoulders shook. The bioluminescent glow of his skin dimmed to almost nothing, a Thalvori expression of grief so deep it bordered on death. He had sent his best into the void, his brightest, his bravest, the only one of his children who had the courage to look into the dark and say, I will go. The void had kept her. He whispered the old death prayer, the one his own father had taught him centuries ago. The words tasted like ash. They were meant for soldiers and elders who had lived full lives, not for young women with golden eyes and fire in their blood. But the void did not care about fairness. It never had. Voreth sat in the dark and mourned his daughter, and the crystal throne beneath him had never felt so cold. The planet had no name. No one had ever bothered to give it one because no one had ever known it existed. It orbited a dying red star at the edge of nothing, a broken world of jagged mountains, toxic valleys, and skies the color of bruised fruit. The air was breathable in some places and poisonous in others, and the only way to tell the difference was to watch the local insects. If they flew, you could breathe. If they didn't, you ran. Sergeant Ethan Cole had learned that lesson the hard way during his first week on the planet. He had learned a lot of lessons the hard way. That was more or less the story of his life. 2 years ago, his ship, the UES Harrower, a deep space exploration vessel belonging to the United Earth Defense Force, had suffered a catastrophic drive failure while mapping uncharted space beyond the colonial frontier. The explosion had killed everyone else on board. Ethan had survived because he happened to be in the cargo bay at the time, wearing a pressure suit, trying to fix a refrigeration unit that kept freezing the coffee supply. The blast had thrown him clear of the wreck. He had landed on this nameless rock with nothing but a pressure suit, a toolkit, and a very strong desire to not die. 2 years later, he had built something that almost resembled a life. His outpost was a patchwork fortress constructed from the harrower's wreckage, solar panels ripped from the hull, water recyclers rebuilt from engine coolant systems, and defensive walls made from stacked hull plating. He had a small garden where bioengineered vegetables grew in soil he had spent months decontaminating by hand. He had a shelter with a working heater. He had traps set around the perimeter for the six-legged predators he called uglies, because they were, without question, the ugliest things he had ever seen. He was alone. He had been alone for 731 days. He kept count by scratching marks into a metal plate beside his bed. He talked to himself constantly, because silence on this planet was the kind of silence that could drive a person mad. Sometimes he talked to the coffee maker he had rebuilt from spare parts. He had named it Linda after his commanding officer, because both of them were difficult, unreliable, and absolutely essential to his survival. He was adjusting Linda's heating element on the morning that the sky caught fire. The sound came first, a deep, tearing roar that shook the ground beneath his feet. Ethan dropped his tools and ran outside. Above the mountains to the east, a streak of burning light cut across the purple sky like a wound. It was a ship, a big one, and it was coming down hard and fast with no sign of controlled descent. The impact shook the planet. A column of smoke and dust rose from beyond the eastern ridge, tall enough to touch the clouds. Ethan stood outside his outpost and stared at it for a long time. Another ship, another crew, possibly survivors. He packed a bag medical kit, water, a makeshift weapon he had built from a pipe and a sharpened piece of hull metal, and started walking. It took him 6 hours to reach the crash site. What he found was a ship unlike anything he had ever seen. It was sleek and organic looking, as if it had been grown rather than built. The hull was a deep silver that shimmered with faint, shifting colors, like oil on water. Most of it was destroyed. The front section had buried itself in the mountainside, and the rear section was scattered across a kilometer of broken terrain. There were bodies, tall bodies much taller than him, 4 arms each, skin that glowed faintly even in death like dying embers. They wore armor that looked like it was made of liquid metal, and their faces were sharp and angular with wide-set eyes and no visible noses. Aliens. Real, actual aliens. Ethan had always figured he was not alone in the universe. He had just hoped that, when first contact finally happened, it would involve less fire and more handshaking. He heard sounds from deeper in the wreckage, voices, harsh and guttural, survivors. He moved closer carefully. He found 5 of them, 3 soldiers, wounded but standing, holding weapons that hummed with energy, 1 officer in heavier armor, unconscious on the ground, and 1 figure that was different from the rest, female, he guessed, based on the slightly different build. She was leaning against a broken wall with a deep gash across her side, her amber glowing skin flickering like a candle in the wind. Despite the wound, her golden eyes were open, sharp and watching everything. The soldiers saw him first. They shouted something he could not understand and raised their weapons. Ethan dropped behind a piece of wreckage as a bolt of energy sizzled over his head and melted a rock behind him. "Okay," he muttered, "not friendly, got it." He did not want to fight. He also did not want to die, so he did what he did best, he improvised. Over the past 2 years, he had built a collection of traps for the planet's predators. He had an EMP snare in his bag that he had designed to short out the Ugly's nervous systems. He threw it. The device hit the ground between 2 soldiers and detonated with a sharp crack. Their weapons died. Their armor locked up. They stumbled and fell, alive but unable to move. The 3rd soldier charged him with bare hands. Ethan sidestepped, tripped him with the pipe weapon, and pinned him down with a knee on his back. The soldier was twice his size and 4 times his weight, but Ethan knew how to use leverage, and he knew how to be quick. A voice stopped him, weak-pained but carrying the unmistakable tone of command. The female with the golden eyes was speaking. She was looking directly at Ethan, and even though he understood nothing she said, the meaning was clear. Stop. Wait. She spoke to her soldiers. They stopped struggling. She looked at Ethan again and made a gesture, palms open, arms lowered. Ethan had never seen the gesture before, but it looked enough like, "I mean no harm," that he let the soldier go and stepped back. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. She studied him with open curiosity, her golden eyes moving over his face, his body, his crude equipment. He could almost see the calculations running behind those eyes, this small, soft creature with no claws, no armor, no glow, no visible weapons worth mentioning. And yet he was alive, healthy, and clearly had been surviving on this world for a long time. Ethan pointed at her wound. Blood darker than human blood, almost black, was still flowing. He opened his medical kit and held it up for her to see. Bandages, antiseptic, a plasma torch he used for sealing cuts in metal, recalibrated for organic tissue. He pointed at her wound again, then at the kit, then at himself. "I can help." She hesitated. Her soldiers growled warnings. She silenced them with a look and nodded once. He knelt beside her and went to work. The wound was deep but clean. He disinfected it, she hissed, but did not pull away, and used the plasma torch to seal the edges. It was rough work, nothing like proper surgery, but it would hold. She watched his hands the entire time, her expression unreadable. Over the following weeks, something changed between them. Language was a wall, but survival was a bridge. Ethan showed them how to find clean water, how to read the wind patterns that predicted toxic air pockets, how to avoid the uglies' hunting grounds. He shared his food, his shelter, his tools. She learned fast, faster than anyone he had ever met. Within days she was picking up his words: water, fire, danger, safe, sleep, eat. Within 2 weeks she could form rough sentences. Her name, she told him, was Caliph. She said it slowly, watching his mouth to see if he could repeat it. He could, mostly. Her soldiers watched him with suspicion that slowly turned to confusion, and then, grudgingly, to something like respect. It happened the day one of them was bitten by a creature whose venom could stop a heart in minutes. Ethan had seen the creature before. He had been bitten himself during his first year and had nearly died. He had spent weeks afterward brewing an antivenom from the creature's own glands, working through trial and error until he found something that worked. He injected the soldier without hesitation. Then he sat beside him for 6 hours, monitoring his breathing, adjusting the dosage, refusing to sleep. The soldier survived. When he woke, he looked at Ethan with wide, glowing eyes and said something in his own language. Caliph translated it later when her words were good enough. "He said you are strange," she told Ethan. "He said no creature should care that much about a stranger." Ethan shrugged. "Where I come from, that's kind of the whole point." She sat beside him that night by the fire he had built from dried alien wood. The flames were green on this world, something about the mineral content of the plants. She stared into them for a long time before she spoke. "Your people," she said carefully, testing each word, "they are warriors." Ethan looked at her. He thought about Earth. He thought about its long, bloody, beautiful, terrible history. He thought about every war, every disaster, every plague, every time humanity had been knocked to the ground and gotten back up with dirt on its face and fire in its eyes. "No," he said quietly, "we're just really bad at dying." Caliph looked at him. Something shifted in her golden eyes, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. The green fire crackled between them, and the nameless planet turned slowly beneath its dying red star. And for the first time in 2 years, Ethan Cole did not feel alone. The data told a story that neither of them wanted to believe. Caliph had recovered enough to walk without help, and she spent her days digging through the wreckage of the pale flame, pulling out every intact data core and sensor log she could find. Ethan helped her carry the equipment back to his outpost. where they laid it out on the floor of his shelter, like pieces of a terrible puzzle. The Harrower's navigation computer, damaged but still functional, held 2 years of passive sensor readings from the planet's surface. The pale flame science array, though cracked and drained, contained high-resolution scans taken during the ship's approach through the void wall. When Calith ran the 2 data sets together on a jury-rigged display, the picture that emerged made her go still. The blight tide, the wave of entropy that was slowly eating the Thalvori Empire, was not a natural phenomenon. It was not a cosmic accident or an unknown force of physics. It had a pattern. It had a rhythm. It had a source. Something was generating it. Something was sitting deep in the void beyond the void wall, broadcasting a field of decay across hundreds of light years, and it was doing it on purpose. "This is a weapon," Calith said. Her voice was flat. She had learned enough of Ethan's language by now to speak in full sentences, though her accent turned every syllable into something sharp and precise. "Someone is using this against my people." Ethan looked at the data. He was not a scientist. He was a combat engineer, a man who fixed things that were broken and broke things that needed fixing. But even he could see the pattern. The energy readings formed concentric rings, expanding outward from a single point like ripples in water. Whatever was at the center of those rings was powerful beyond anything either of their civilizations had ever built. "Your father needs to see this," Ethan said. Calith closed her eyes. "My father thinks I am dead." "Then we need to tell him you're not." The problem was simple and enormous at the same time. They had no ship. The pale flame was destroyed. The Harrower was a ruin. Neither vessel could fly. But between them, scattered across kilometers of hostile terrain, were the broken remains of 2 completely different technologies, Thalvori and human, and somewhere in that wreckage, Ethan believed, was a way off this planet. Calith's 2 surviving soldiers, Rethak and Voss, thought he was insane. Thalvori engineering was based on crystalline energy matrices and biointegrated systems. Human engineering was based on metal, wiring, and what Ethan cheerfully described as hitting things until they work. The 2 technologies were not just different. They were fundamentally incompatible. Trying to merge them would be like trying to teach a fish to climb a tree. Ethan's response to this was simple. "I've seen fish climb trees," he said. "You just need the right tree." He did not sleep for the first 5 days. Calith watched him work with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. He pulled the pale flame's drive core, a crystalline sphere the size of his torso that hummed with energy she could feel in her bones, and carried it piece by piece back to the Harrower's frame. He spent hours staring at Thalvori circuit patterns, not understanding the science behind them but understanding the logic. Energy flowed from here to here. Power was regulated by this. Output was controlled by that. He did not try to learn how Thalvori technology worked. He simply figured out what it needed to do, and then found human ways to make it do those things. When the crystalline drive core refused to interface with the Harrower's power grid, Ethan built an adapter out of copper wiring, a salvaged transformer, and a cooling system made from the planet's natural water filtration plants. When the navigation computer could not read Thalvori star charts, he wrote a translation program using basic mathematics, the one language both civilizations shared. Calith helped where she could. She explained the principles behind her ship's systems in her careful, accented English. She corrected his mistakes. She watched him fail, curse, tear something apart and start over. She watched him burn his hands on hot metal and keep working. She watched him eat cold food standing up because sitting down meant losing minutes he could not spare. "You do not rest," she told him one night, standing in the doorway of the makeshift engineering bay as sparks flew behind him. "I'll rest when we're flying," he said without looking up. "You will die before we fly if you do not sleep." "Then I'll die busy." She stared at him for a long time. Then she walked over, took the tool from his hand, and pointed at the cot in the corner. Her expression left no room for argument. He opened his mouth to protest, saw the look in her golden eyes, and decided that some battles were not worth fighting. He slept for 4 hours. When he woke, he found that Calith had continued his work. She had made mistakes, her hands were not used to human tools, but she had also made progress. The drive core's energy output was stabilizing. The power grid was holding. It took them 37 days. The finished product was, by any reasonable standard, the ugliest ship ever built. It was a lopsided, patched-together nightmare of silver Thalvori hull plates welded to gray human steel. The Harrower's cockpit sat on top of the pale flames engine section like a hat on a dog. Wires hung from every surface. The life support system made a sound like a sick animal. One of the landing struts was shorter than the other 3, so the whole ship leaned slightly to the left. Ethan looked at it with the pride of a parent holding an ugly baby. "I'm calling it the Ugly Miracle," he said. "That is a terrible name," Calith said. "It's a terrible ship, the name fits." They loaded the data cores, packed supplies for a journey they could not accurately predict, and strapped in. Rithak and Voss took positions in the rear section, operating the Thalvori systems. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat. Calith sat beside him. "If this does not work," she said, "we will die very quickly." "If this does not work, we won't have time to notice," Ethan replied. He flipped the ignition sequence. The ship groaned, shuddered, and rattled like it was about to shake itself apart. Then the drive core caught. A deep, resonant hum filled the cabin, and the Ugly Miracle lifted off the ground on unsteady legs of fire. They rose through the atmosphere of the nameless planet and turned toward the void wall. The journey back was worse than the journey out. The blight tide resisted them. Gravitational eddies pulled at the ship from every direction, trying to tear it apart. Sensor blackouts left them flying blind for minutes at a time. The hull creaked and moaned under stresses it was never designed to handle. Ethan flew by instinct. When the instruments failed, he felt the ship's movements through the seat beneath him and the vibrations in the controls. He made adjustments by touch, by sound, by the look of the stars outside the cracked viewport. He talked to the ship constantly, encouragement, insults, threats, promises. "Come on, you beautiful disaster," he muttered through clenched teeth as a gravitational wave hit them broadside and the hull screamed. "Hold together, just hold together." Calith gripped her seat as the ship rolled hard to the left. She looked at Ethan. He was grinning. In the middle of what might be the last moments of their lives, the human was grinning. "Are you enjoying this?" she demanded. "No," he said, pulling the ship through a spinning debris field with a move that should have been impossible. "But if I'm scared, I can't think, so I'm not scared." She stared at him. Humans did not conquer fear, she realized. They simply decided not to feel it. They shoved it into a box, sat on the lid, and kept working. It was the most insane and most admirable thing she had ever seen. They broke through the void wall on the 3rd day. The stars of known space spread out before them like scattered diamonds, and Ethan let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a month. Calith activated the communication array and transmitted her royal identification codes on every Thalvori frequency. For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Then the static cleared, and a voice spoke, sharp, shocked, trembling with disbelief. Calith responded. She spoke quickly in her own language, her voice steady and commanding. The voice on the other end went silent. Then other voices joined, dozens of them, overlapping, all asking questions at once. Ethan did not understand a word, but he understood the tone. It was the sound of people who had just seen a ghost. Within the hour, a Thalvori patrol fleet surrounded the Ugly Miracle. Sleek warships, each one 100 times the size of their battered hybrid vessel, hung in space around them like silver whales around a minnow. A fleet commander's face appeared on their screen. He was tall, scarred, and his 4 arms were crossed in what Ethan guessed was either suspicion or shock. The commander looked at Calith, scarred, thin, her amber skin glowing steady and strong. Then he looked at Ethan, small, soft, covered in grease and bandages, sitting in the pilot's seat of the most ridiculous ship ever built. The commander said something to Caliph. She replied. His eyes went wide. He turned and shouted an order to someone off-screen. The urgency in his voice needed no translation. Caliph turned to Ethan. For the first time since he had met her, she smiled. "He is calling my father," she said. "He is telling the king that his daughter lives." Ithara Prime was the most beautiful world Ethan had ever seen, and he hated it immediately. The planet was a masterpiece of crystal and light. Towers rose from its surface like frozen lightning bolts, their surfaces shifting with colors that had no name in any human language. The sky was a deep violet, streaked with rings of orbiting stations that glittered like jewelry. The air smelled like rain and something sweet he could not identify. Everything was clean, elegant, and designed to remind visitors that they were standing in the heart of the greatest empire in known space. Ethan stepped off the ugly miracle in his torn flight suit, with grease under his fingernails and a 3-week beard on his face, and approximately 4,000 Thalvori stared at him like he was a bug that had crawled out of their dinner. He had expected this. Caliph had warned him during the journey. Her people were proud. They measured worth by strength, by legacy, by the glow of one's skin and the sharpness of one's mind. Ethan possessed none of these things by Thalvori standards. He was small, soft, dull-skinned, and short-lived. To them, he was not impressive. He was barely noticeable. The welcome for Caliph, however, was something else entirely. The moment she appeared at the ship's door, the crowd went silent. Then a sound rose, a deep, harmonic vibration that came from thousands of Thalvori throats at once. It was their version of cheering, Caliph explained later. It sounded like a cathedral singing. King Voreth met them in the Grand Hall of Thorns. Ethan had seen the throne room described in Caliph's stories, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. The room was enormous, carved from a single crystal that amplified every sound and reflected every movement. The Council of Thorns sat in tiered rows along the walls, old warriors, politicians, nobles, all of them watching with glowing eyes. And at the far end, on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself, sat King Voreth Maltherin. He was the largest Thalvori Ethan had ever seen. His 4 arms rested on the throne's crystal armrests like weapons waiting to be used. His skin pulsed with a deep, slow blue-white light, the glow of immense age and power. His face was carved from stone, expressionless, unreadable. His eyes were the same gold as Caliph's, but deeper, darker, like old coins left in the sun. Caliph walked toward her father. She did not run. She did not bow. She walked with the steady, measured pace of someone who had earned the right to stand before a king as an equal. She stopped 3 steps from the throne and spoke in Thalvori, formal, precise, respectful. Voreth looked at her for a long time. Then slowly he rose. The entire court held its breath. The king descended 3 steps and placed 2 of his 4 hands on his daughter's shoulders. His skin's glow brightened until the whole room was bathed in blue-white light. It was, Ethan learned later, the Thalvori expression of overwhelming emotion, joy so deep it became visible. Voreth spoke a single word. Caliph's eyes shimmered. She bowed her head and her father pulled her close. Then Voreth's eyes found Ethan. The warmth drained from the king's expression. He studied Ethan the way a scientist studies a specimen, with interest, with curiosity, and with absolutely no warmth. He spoke to Caliph without looking away from Ethan. She answered. His eyes narrowed. Ethan was placed under what Caliph diplomatically called honored guest protocols. In practice, this meant a comfortable room with no lock on the inside and 4 armed guards outside the door. Thalvori scientists visited him daily. They scanned him, measured him, tested his reflexes, analyzed his blood. Their conclusions, passed through the court in whispers, were not flattering. Humans were biologically unremarkable. Their strength was average. They had no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no armored skin. Their senses were limited. Their lifespans were laughably short. By every measurable standard, humans should not have survived their own planet, let alone the void. And yet this one had, for 2 years, alone, on a world that had killed trained Thalvori soldiers in days. The confusion bothered the court. Confusion, in Ethan's experience, usually turned into hostility. He was right. Prince Draven Maltherin came to visit him on the 3rd day. Calith's eldest brother was everything she was not: smooth, polished, and fundamentally hollow. He smiled with his mouth but not his eyes, and his skin glowed with a carefully controlled brightness that never varied, like a mask. He spoke perfect, formal sentences in a language Ethan could not understand, and a translator device rendered them into flat, emotionless English. "You have done my family a great service," Draven said, sitting across from Ethan in his guest quarters. "Returning our beloved Calith to us, we are grateful." "You're welcome," Ethan said. He had learned enough about politics, human and alien, to recognize a threat wrapped in courtesy. "However," Draven continued, "there are those on the council who question the nature of your relationship with the princess. She was alone, wounded, vulnerable. You were the only other living being on that world. Some might say that any bond formed under such circumstances is not trust but dependency." "Some might say a lot of things," Ethan replied. "Does your sister strike you as the dependent type?" Draven's smile did not change. He left without another word. 2 days later, Calith presented her findings to the full Council of Thorns. She stood before the assembled power of the Thalvori Empire and showed them the data, the pattern of the Blight Tide, the evidence that it was an engineered weapon, the calculated location of its source. She proposed a joint expedition with humanity to find and destroy whatever was generating it. The council erupted, not with interest, not with urgency, but with outrage. An alliance with an unknown species, a species so weak that a single specimen was their only proof of its existence. Several council members openly laughed. Others shouted objections. One elderly general stood and declared that Calith had clearly been mentally compromised by her ordeal. Draven waited until the noise reached its peak, then spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and devastating. He did not attack Calith directly. He did not need to. He simply pointed out, with great regret and sympathy, that the princess had been alone with this alien creature for months, that she had been injured, desperate, and dependent on his goodwill, that any conclusions she had drawn might be colored by gratitude rather than reason. He proposed a simple test, the trial of worth, an ancient Thalvori ritual in which an outsider proved their value through single combat. If Ethan refused, it would confirm that he was weak, and his influence over Calith was built on manipulation. If he accepted, the truth of his nature would be revealed in the Pit of Echoes. Calith was furious. She stormed into Ethan's quarters that evening with her skin blazing amber and her golden eyes burning. "You cannot accept," she said. "The champion they will choose, Goreth the Unbroken. He is the finest warrior in the Empire. He has never lost. He is twice your height, 3 times your weight, and he has 4 arms, each one stronger than your entire body. This is not a trial, it is an execution." Ethan sat on his bed and looked at his hands. They were small by Thalvori standards, scarred, calloused, and unremarkable. "If I refuse, what happens to your plan, the alliance, the mission?" Calith was silent. "That's what I thought," Ethan said. He stood up. "So I accept." The Pit of Echoes was a circular arena carved deep into the crystal bedrock of Ithara Prime. The entire court attended. Thousands of Thalvori sat in ascending rings around the pit, their combined bioluminescent glow turning the arena into a bowl of living light. Draven sat near the king, his expression perfectly composed. Goreth the Unbroken stood in the center of the pit. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms thick as tree trunks and skin that glowed with the deep red of a warrior's fire. He wore no armor. He needed none. Ethan walked into the pit in his flight suit. He carried nothing. The crowd murmured, some laughed. Goreth charged. The first hit sent Ethan flying. He hit the crystal floor, skidded, and felt something crack in his ribs. The crowd roared. Goreth advanced, arms raised for a finishing blow. Ethan rolled. The fist hit the floor where his head had been and cracked the crystal. Ethan scrambled to his feet and moved. He did not try to hit Goreth. He did not try to block. He simply moved constantly, unpredictably, using the pit's walls and uneven floor to stay one step ahead of those massive arms. Goreth was powerful, but power meant weight, and weight meant momentum, and momentum meant that every time Ethan changed direction, Goreth had to stop and reset. The champion was built for overwhelming force, not for chasing a target that would not stand still. Minutes passed. Ethan took hits, a glancing blow to the shoulder, a knee to the stomach, a backhand that split his lip and filled his mouth with blood. Each time he went down, the crowd expected him to stay down. Each time he got back up. 10 minutes, 15, 20. Ethan was bleeding from half a dozen wounds. His left eye was swelling shut. His ribs screamed with every breath. But he was still standing, still moving, and Goreth was starting to slow. Ethan had studied predators for 2 years. He knew how big creatures fought. They relied on ending things quickly. When the quick end did not come, they burned through their energy reserves. They got frustrated. They made mistakes. Goreth made his mistake at the 22-minute mark. He overextended on a swing, putting all 4 arms into a blow meant to end the fight. Ethan ducked under it, stepped inside his reach, and drove his knee into the nerve cluster Caliph had once mentioned existed on the inner thigh of every Thalvori. Goreth staggered. Ethan hit him again, an elbow to the same spot, then a sharp kick to the back of his knee. The champion dropped to one leg. Ethan did not stop. He could not afford to. He struck every vulnerable point he could reach: joints, nerve clusters, the soft tissue beneath the jaw. Small hits, precise hits. None of them powerful enough to drop a Thalvori on their own, but together, over time, they added up. Goreth fell. He hit the crystal floor on his hands and knees, breathing in great, ragged gasps. His red glow flickered. The arena was completely silent. Ethan stood over him, swaying, barely conscious. Blood ran down his face and dripped from his chin. His left arm hung at a bad angle. He looked like a man who should have been dead 20 minutes ago. He reached out his hand to Goreth. The champion stared at it. Then slowly he took it. Ethan helped him rise. The crowd watched a broken, bleeding human lift a fallen giant to his feet, and no one made a sound. King Voreth stood from his throne. He descended into the pit of echoes and walked until he stood before Ethan. The silence in the arena was absolute. Voreth looked at Ethan for a long time. He saw the blood, the broken bones, the swelling bruises. He saw the man who should have fallen and did not. He saw what his daughter had seen on that nameless world: not strength, not superiority, but something harder and stranger and more stubborn than either. "I sent my daughter into the void," Voreth said, and the crystal walls carried his voice to every ear in the arena, believing it would consume her. Instead, she found something the void could not consume. He placed one massive hand on Ethan's shoulder. The human did not flinch. "You have the attention of the Thalvori Empire, human. Speak." Ethan stood in the pit of echoes with blood drying on his face, and the weight of an alien empire's attention pressing down on him like gravity. The crystal walls reflected his image back at him from every angle, a small, battered, unremarkable creature standing before the most powerful being in 12-star systems. He did not give a grand speech. He did not know how. He was a combat engineer, not a diplomat. He fixed broken things and survived situations that should have killed him. Speeches were not in his training manual. So he told the truth. "I'm not going to pretend I represent all of humanity," he said. His voice was rough, and his cracked lip made certain words difficult, but the translation device carried his meaning clearly to every ear in the arena. "I'm one man. I fix engines and I drink bad coffee and I talk to machines because there's nobody else to talk to. I'm nobody special." He paused, the silence waited. "But my people are. Not because we're strong, we're not. A Thalvori child could probably beat me in an arm wrestling match. Not because we're smart. We spent most of our history hitting each other with rocks and arguing about which rocks were better. And definitely not because we're brave. We're terrified all the time. Of the dark, of each other, of the things we don't understand." He looked up at the tiers of glowing faces surrounding him. "But we go into the dark anyway. We always have. When our world burned, we planted seeds. When our seas rose, we built boats. When we ran out of world, we built ships and went looking for more. Not because we weren't afraid, because being afraid was never a good enough reason to stop." He turned to look at King Voreth. The ancient king's golden eyes were unreadable. "Something out there is killing your empire. I've seen the data. So has your daughter. It's a weapon and it has a source, and if nobody stops it, it will eat everything, your worlds, your people, and eventually mine too. I can't fight it alone. You can't fight it alone. But together, maybe we have a chance." He took a breath. His ribs protested. He ignored them. "My people are scattered out there. Small colonies, research stations, exploration ships. We don't have a fleet like yours. We don't have crystal cities or energy weapons or 3 centuries of empire. But we have engineers who can build anything from nothing. We have soldiers who don't know when to quit. We have scientists who solve problems by being too stubborn to accept that the problems are unsolvable." He looked around the arena one more time. "I'm not asking you to trust us. I'm asking you to let us help. Because the thing that's out there doesn't care about borders or species or who has the bigger army. It's coming for all of us. And the only way to stop it is to go meet it together." He stopped talking. He had nothing else to say. The silence stretched for 10 heartbeats. Then King Voreth spoke. "The Thalvori Empire will go to war," he said. His voice was quiet, but the crystal walls carried it like thunder. "And we will not go alone." The preparations took 3 months. During that time, the Ugly Miracles communication array, boosted by Thalvori signal technology, broadcast on every known human frequency. The message was simple: coordinates, a summary of the threat, and an invitation. Ethan recorded it himself, sitting in the communication room of the royal palace, surrounded by alien technology and speaking into a microphone that had been hastily adapted for human vocal ranges. The response was slow at first. Then it grew. Ships arrived at the rendezvous point in 1s and 2s, battered exploration vessels, repurposed cargo haulers, a handful of actual military craft from colonial defense forces. They were small, outdated, and poorly armed compared to the gleaming Thalvori warships, but they came. Kalith was named commander of the combined fleet. She had earned it by surviving the void, by bringing back the intelligence that had given them a target, and by being the only person in the Empire whom both the Thalvori military and the human volunteers trusted equally. Ethan served as her tactical advisor, a role that had never existed in Thalvori history and that several council members still found offensive. Voreth watched the fleet assemble from the observation platform of the royal palace. Beside him stood Kalith, dressed in the silver armor of a Thalvori fleet commander, and Ethan, wearing a patched human flight suit with a Thalvori communication device strapped awkwardly to his wrist. "You are certain of this path?" Voreth asked his daughter. "I am certain of the threat," she replied, "and I am certain of the man beside me." Voreth looked at Ethan. The human met his gaze without flinching, which was either very brave or very foolish, and Voreth had begun to suspect that with humans, the two were often the same thing. The fleet launched on a cold, clear morning. 200 Thalvori warships and 43 human vessels crossed the void wall in formation and plunged into the dark. The journey took 11 days. Each day was harder than the last. The blight tide grew stronger as they approached its source, pulling at the ships with invisible hands. Systems failed. Hulls cracked. 3 ships were lost in a gravitational storm that appeared without warning and vanished just as quickly, leaving nothing behind. On the 12th day, they found it. The hollow was not what any of them had expected. It was not a machine. It was not a weapon. It was alive, or something close to alive. It hung in the void like a vast, dark flower, its tendrils stretching across light years, each one a conduit for the entropy field that was devouring the galaxy. It was ancient, it was enormous, and it was dying. Calith's science officers determined the truth within hours. The hollow was a post-biological intelligence, something that had once been a civilization perhaps, or the remnant of one. It had transcended physical form eons ago and existed now as pure energy. But that energy was fatting. It was consuming the energy of surrounding star systems to sustain itself, not out of malice, but out of desperation. It was starving, and the blight tide was its feeding. It did not matter. Desperate or not, it was destroying everything in its path. It would not stop because it could not stop. Survival had no morality. The fleet engaged. Thalvori warships fired their energy lances at the hollow's tendrils while human vessels darted between the massive structures, targeting weak points identified by sensor scans. The battle was chaos, beautiful, terrible, and overwhelming. Then Draven struck. Calith's brother had traveled with the fleet, ostensibly as a representative of the royal family. In truth, he had spent the journey in secret communication with the hollow itself. He had offered a deal, the coordinates of the Thalvori homeworld, in exchange for his own survival and a guarantee of power over whatever remained. The hollow, or whatever intelligence still directed it, had accepted. Draven's sabotage was precise. At the height of the battle, the flagship's shields collapsed. Simultaneously, 3 critical Thalvori warships lost power. The hollow's tendrils surged forward, wrapping around the disabled vessels and beginning to drain them. Calith traced the sabotage to Draven's quarters in minutes. She found him at a console, transmitting data, his skin glowing with a sickly, excited light. Their fight was brief and savage. Draven was a politician, not a warrior. Calith had been forged on a nameless world at the edge of nothing. She disarmed him in 3 moves and put him on the floor with a strike that cracked 2 of his arms. He looked up at her with hatred and fear and something that might have been relief, as if he had known all along that this was how it would end. "You've killed us," Calith said. "I've saved myself," Draven whispered. "The hollow cannot be beaten. I chose the winning side." Calith left him under guard and returned to the bridge. The fleet was in crisis. The hollow was adapting to their attacks, redirecting its tendrils to overwhelm their weakest points. Without the flagship's shields, they were exposed. Ethan was already at the tactical console. He had been studying the hollow's energy patterns since the battle began, and he had seen something the others had missed. The hollow consumed energy. That was its nature. It took in power and used it to sustain itself. But what happened if it took in more than it could handle? "The hybrid drive," he said to Calith. "The one I built from your technology and mine. It's unstable. That's why it works. It produces energy in a pattern that neither system was designed for. If I overload it and fly it into the hollow's core, the feedback loop will force it to consume energy it can't process. It'll tear itself apart from the inside." Calith understood immediately. She also understood what he was not saying. "You are describing a one-way flight," she said. "I'm describing the only option we have left." "No," her voice was sharp and absolute. "I will not allow this." "Calith," he turned to face her. His eyes were calm, not brave, not fearless, just calm, the way a person is calm when they have made their peace. "Your empire needs you. Your father needs you. The Alliance needs you. My people need someone to remember we were here." He paused. "Let me do what humans do best." She stared at him. Her golden eyes burned. For a moment, the war, the hollow, the dying fleet, all of it disappeared, and there was nothing in the universe except the 2 of them standing on the bridge of a crumbling flagship. She wanted to argue. She wanted to order him to stand down. She wanted to tell him that his life mattered more than any mission, any alliance, any empire. But she had survived alongside him for months on a world that should have killed them both, and she knew with a certainty that went deeper than words that he would go regardless. He was human. This was what they did. She reached out and placed her hand against his chest. He put his hand over hers. "Come back," she said. "I'll try," he said. And then, with something that was almost a smile, "I'm really bad at dying, remember." The ugly miracle had been repaired and upgraded with Thalvori technology during the 3 months of preparation. But at its heart, it was still the same impossible machine that Ethan had built from 2 wrecks on a nameless planet. He climbed into the pilot's seat, ran his hands over the controls one last time, and fired the engines. The ship shot forward past the fleet, past the wreckage, past the reaching tendrils of the hollow. Behind him, the fleet fought to give him a clear path, Thalvori warships drawing fire while human vessels cleared debris from his route. It was not a coordinated military maneuver. It was 100 ships from 2 different species deciding, in the same moment, that one man's life was worth protecting. Ethan plunged into the hollow's core. The world outside the viewport became nothing but light, vast, terrible, and ancient. He could feel the intelligence behind it pressing against his mind, confused and angry and afraid. It was dying, and it did not want to die. He understood that. He understood it better than it knew. He activated the overload sequence. The hybrid drive screamed. Energy poured outward in a wave that the hollow could not resist consuming. The feedback loop began, a cascading chain reaction of incompatible energy that tore through the ancient intelligence like fire through paper. The hollow screamed. The sound echoed across every frequency, every channel, every sensor in the fleet. It was the sound of something vast and old and lonely reaching the end of its existence. Then silence. The blight tide collapsed. Across hundreds of light years, the entropy field folded inward and vanished. Stars that had been dimming for decades steadied. Frozen worlds began to thaw. The void breathed again. The fleet searched for Ethan. Hours passed. No signal, no wreckage, nothing. Kayleigh stood on the bridge of the flagship and stared at the place where the hollow had been. Her skin's glow had dimmed to almost nothing. Rithak and Voss stood behind her, silent. Then a sound, faint, flickering. A human emergency beacon, broadcasting on a loop from somewhere in the debris field. "This is Sergeant Ethan Cole, UEDF. I'm still here. Could use a ride." The rescue ship found him floating in the shattered remains of the ugly miracle, sealed in his flight suit with approximately 4 minutes of oxygen remaining. His helmet was cracked. His suit was burned. 3 of his ribs were broken again, and his left hand had 2nd-degree burns across every finger. He was grinning. The ceremony on Ithara Prime was the largest in the Empire's 3-century history. Every system sent representatives. Every human colony that had contributed ships sent delegates. The Grand Hall of Thorns was filled to capacity, and the crystal walls sang with the combined glow of thousands. King Voreth stood before his throne and addressed them all. "For 3 centuries I measured worth by strength," he said, "by conquest, by the power to dominate. I believed that the greatest beings were those who never fell." He looked at Ethan, who stood beside Kayleigh at the foot of the throne. The human was bandaged, bruised, and leaning slightly to one side to favor his broken ribs. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had been knocked down more times than anyone could count, and had gotten up every single time. "I was wrong," Voreth said. "True worth is not in the being who never falls. It is in the being who falls and rises, who falls again and rises again, who bleeds and breaks and still reaches out a hand to lift others." He descended from the throne. The court watched in silence as the king of the Thalvori Empire stood before a human sergeant in a patched flight suit and spoke the words that would reshape the galaxy. "I sent my worthy daughter into the void. She returned with something I did not expect. He placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. She returned with a human. The Eternal Compact was signed that day, an alliance between the Thalvori Empire and the human species, unbreakable and permanent. It was carved into the crystal walls of the Grand Hall, where it would remain for as long as the walls stood. Ethan stood beside Caliph on the observation platform of the royal palace that evening, watching the twin suns of Ithara set behind the crystal towers. The sky turned from violet to gold to deep, endless black. Stars appeared, the same stars that had nearly been consumed, now shining steady and bright. Caliph looked at him. "What will you do now?" Ethan thought about it. He thought about the nameless planet, about the ugly miracle, about a fire that burned green and a question asked in broken English. He thought about how far he had come from a broken ship and a coffee maker named Linda. "I don't know," he said, "but I'll figure it out." She smiled. It was a rare thing, a Thalvori smile, small, barely visible, but it changed her entire face. "Yes," she said, "I believe you will." They stood together in the fading light, a princess of crystal and a sergeant of stubbornness, and the galaxy turned around them, vast and dark and full of things worth fighting for.